We're live from New Delhi. You're watching DD India Live, India's voice to the world. I'm Lipakshi Khurana. Coming up in the next 30 minutes. The Colorado Supreme Court disqualifies former President Donald Trump from ballot in the state's presidential primary next year over his role in the Jan 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol by his supporters. United Nations Security Council delays vote on a resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Many UN members call for addressing humanitarian situation in Gaza, but US says resolution fails to sufficiently address Israeli security concerns. Venezuela and Guyana reach truce over territorial dispute, but their Latin American neighbors wonder how long truce will hold. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi responds for the first time to allegations of an Indian assassination plot in US, says will look into any evidence but insists ties with US are strengthening. South Africa level series 1-1 with the win in second ODI against India. Tony de Zorzi scores maiden ODI ton. On to details now. The Colorado Supreme Court ruled on Tuesday that former President Donald Trump cannot be on the ballot in next year's state presidential election due to his involvement in the Jan 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol by his supporters. The 4-3 ruling from the Colorado Supreme Court makes Trump the first U.S. presidential candidate to be ruled ineligible for the presidency under a rarely used provision of the U.S. Constitution that prohibits officials from holding office if they have taken part in a insurrection or rebellion. The Colorado court said the ruling is stayed until Jan 4, 2024 to allow for appeals. The former president says he plans to appeal the decision to the federal Supreme Court. Also, Ira Spitzer sends us a detailed report from San Francisco on this.
In a 4-3 ruling, the Colorado Supreme Court decided that Donald Trump is ineligible to hold office again and ordered him removed from the state's upcoming primary ballot. However, the court stayed its ruling until at least January 4th to allow the former president time to appeal to the federal Supreme Court, which he plans to do. The Colorado court accepted the argument that Trump was disqualified as a result of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. That forbids people who have engaged in insurrection against the Constitution after having taken an oath to support it from holding office. Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, in an attempt to stop Joe Biden's victory from being certified. One of the main questions the Colorado court considered was what role Trump played in the events of that day. Similar efforts in 3 other states to remove Trump from the ballot have so far been unsuccessful. However, if the Supreme Court affirms the Colorado ruling, Trump, who is currently the Republican frontrunner, could also face disqualification in other states. A spokesman for the Trump campaign lashed out at the ruling, calling it a left-wing scheme to interfere in the election. Ira Spitzer reporting in San Francisco for DD India.
And Donald Trump addressed a rally in Iowa shortly after a court in Colorado barred the former president from appearing on the state's ballot in the 2024 presidential election. The Colorado Supreme Court ruled that Trump is disqualified from the election because of his role in the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol by his supporters. Trump told supporters in Iowa that U.S. President Joe Biden a threat to democracy. Former U.S. President also defended his comments about migrants crossing the southern border of America, and he reinforced the message while denying any similarities to fascist writings others had noted. And New York Governor Kathy Hochul authorized a commission to consider reparations for the state's role in perpetuating historic discrimination against African Americans, making New York the second U.S. state to launch such an effort. The state will not be required to follow the recommendations of the commission. New York lawmakers and civil rights activists who attended Hochul's signing ceremony at the New York Historical Society in Manhattan hailed it as a key step towards confronting the state's legacy of slavery and resulting racial gaps in wealth, employment and criminal justice. The first U.S. state task force to research and develop reparation proposals for African Americans was launched in California in 2020. Meanwhile, the United Nations Security Council has delayed a vote on a resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Many UN members say the move is vital to address the humanitarian situation in the Palestinian enclave, but the United States has expressed concerns that the text fails to sufficiently address Israeli security concerns. William Denselor reports from UN headquarters in New York.
Tuesday was another frustrating day at the United Nations as diplomats continue to wrangle over the language in a draft resolution on the situation in Gaza. Earlier this week, we saw this draft presented that had a call for the urgent suspension of hostilities to allow safe and unhindered humanitarian access. But what we understand from reports is that the United States has had real issues with some of the language in this draft resolution and wants it watered down. It's understood that the draft included the phrase urgent steps towards a sustainable cessation of hostilities. It's understood that Washington has an issue with the reference to cessation of hostilities. So that has been a major stumbling block for diplomats at the United Nations. UN officials on Tuesday expressed the dire need for more humanitarian access into the Palestinian enclave. The UN estimates that around 85% of people in Gaza are now internally displaced. They warned that UN humanitarian groups working on the ground there are on the brink of collapse. UN officials say that the situation for civilians, they say that the impact has been unbearable for them, really imploring council members to come together and to pass a meaningful resolution to get more humanitarian access into the Gaza Strip and really try and see more protection of civilians going forward. We have heard on Tuesday from Robert Wood, who is the US Alternative Representative for Special Political Affairs. Now, he said to the press on Tuesday afternoon here in New York that efforts were continuing with other members of the Security Council to work on the draft text. He said, we'll see how discussions go. He says they're working on the issues and that we will see what happens. William Denslow in New York, reporting for DD India.
Meanwhile, the United States said that they were working with countries on the United Nations Security Council to resolve outstanding issues related to a draft resolution.
We are engaging constructively with our colleagues on the Security Council to resolve outstanding issues related to that resolution. We fully support addressing the humanitarian needs of the people of Gaza, as this resolution should set out to do, and we're working through these issues with other countries on the Security Council.
Well, Guinea government has warned people to brace for power cuts as the country grapples with the aftermath of a deadly explosion at an oil terminal in the capital, Conakry, that destroyed fuel tanks and forced hundreds to flee damaged homes. 14 people were killed and 190 injured in the blast at the West African nation's main oil terminal, which rocked the Kilom district in downtown Conakry. In its first update on the extent of the damage to the terminal, the government said 13 fuel tanks were out of service, while 5 tanks were unaffected. The extent of the fallout from the blast is not yet clear, or whether mining operations will be affected. And a territorial dispute in a corner of Latin America has sparked international alarm in recent weeks. There's now relief that Venezuela and Guyana have reached a truce, but their Latin American neighbors have been left wondering how long will it last. DD India's Latin American correspondent Mary Trini Mina reports.
This was the handshake that signaled compromise. A pledge not to use force to resolve a dispute going back 100 years. The territory in question, the Essequibo, in the Amazon jungle, which counts for 2/3 of modern-day Guyana.
Agreed that Guyana and Venezuela, directly or indirectly, will not threaten or use force against one another in any circumstances, including those consequential to any existing controversies between the two states.
The border dispute began in the late 1800s when Guyana, a former British colony, established its borders. Ever since then, Venezuela has contested the legality of Guyana's boundaries. The Geneva Agreement of 1966 sought to settle the conflict.
El Acuerdo de Ginebra se firmó ese año.
The Geneva Agreement was signed that year, which sets out a practical and equitable agreement between the parties. Why has it not been solved? Because Guyana has always refused to negotiate.
In 2018, Guyana went further and took the dispute to the International Court of Justice, a court Venezuela doesn't recognize. Over the last decade, Guyana's oil output and revenues have grown dramatically. By contrast, Venezuela sank deeper into economic crisis. Caracas asserted its territorial claim more aggressively. In December, Venezuela held a referendum to approve the creation of a new Venezuelan state. Just days after the vote, President Maduro presented a new map adding the Essequibo, and he ordered state-owned companies to drill for oil and gas in the disputed region.
Venezuela is talking about granting concessions for claimed areas that are mostly offshore, which is fundamentally where the problem lies. What is difficult is to find companies interested in an area that is in dispute.
The territorial dispute has alarmed Venezuela's neighbors, prompting Brazil to take a lead in negotiations. Some analysts say President Maduro is trying to create a distraction from his own economic problems and stroke national unity.
Even though I believe it's highly unlikely that this could end in a war or an armed conflict, you can't rule it out when a government is using and waving the flag of patriotism and nationalism in an effort to unite a country behind itself.
Which is why many fear the truce will not hold. For now, Venezuela is getting ready for a new meeting with Guyana over the Essequibo and upcoming presidential elections, both in 2024. In Caracas, Maritrini Mena, reporting for DD India.
And United Nations officials have called on North Korea to comply with international law after it launched ballistic missiles over the weekend. At a briefing on Tuesday, members of the UN Security Council urged Pyongyang to commit to denuclearization. But Russia and China criticized fellow members for being one-sided. Sally Patterson reports from New York, where the UN is headquartered.
North Korea now has weapons capable of reaching most points on Earth. That was the stark warning from UN Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Asia and the Pacific, Mohammed Khalid Kyari, on Tuesday. Pyongyang's intercontinental ballistic missile, launched on December 18th, flew around 1,000 kilometers before falling into the sea. Kyari said North Korea did not issue any warnings before the launch, calling that a serious risk to aviation and maritime traffic. He said it was imperative to de-escalate the situation on the Korean peninsula and urged Pyongyang to engage in diplomacy, not isolation. Several UN Security Council members called for North Korea to reopen lines of communication and to abandon its nuclear and ballistic missiles programs. The US's alternate permanent representative, Robert Wood, said every council member needed to condemn the missile launches and meaningfully hold Pyongyang to account. He called on Russia and China to join the rest of the council in doing so, while the UK accused those two countries of shielding their ally. But Russia accused the Council of being one-sided and, along with China, condemned the US's so-called show of force in the region. Sally Patterson in New York, reporting for DD India.
And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Tuesday that the military had asked for an additional 450,000 to 500,000 people to be mobilized into the army. At a news conference in Kyiv, the Ukrainian leader said his commanders were due to discuss this very sensitive issue of mobilization and that Parliament would then consider it. Zelensky said that conducting a mobilization at such a scale would require additional financing.
Their position on the General Staff meeting was that they proposed to mobilize an additional 450,000 to 500,000 people. This is a very serious number, and I said that I need more arguments to support this idea. This is a question about people, about justice, about defense capabilities, and a financial question.
Also, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he was confident the U.S. would not betray his country by withholding crucial wartime funding as it fights off a Russian invasion. He also said he expected the European Union to approve a €50 billion aid package soon.
We are working very hard on this, and I'm certain the United States of America will not betray us. And that on which we agreed in the United States will be fulfilled completely. Regarding the European Union, well, everyone played their big cards, and we reached one victory regarding the EU's €50 billion. I'm sure that we have already achieved all of this.
Well, braving sub-zero conditions, rescuers faced an uphill task on Wednesday, finding and treating survivors of the earthquake that hit a remote area in China's northwestern Gansu province. Recovery has been challenged by the powerful cold snap that gripped most of China since last week. Temperatures around the quake epicenter fell to around minus 15 degrees Celsius on Tuesday night as rescuers continued their work. Researchers claim that people trapped under rubble, exposed to minus 10-degree conditions without help run the risk of developing hypothermia, which could be fatal for them. In Gansu, 13 people are reported found dead as of 9 a.m. GMT on Wednesday, and 782 were injured. Death toll in Qinghai rose to 18, with 198 injured as of 5:30 a.m. on Wednesday. 78 people have been rescued in Gansu. And as Singapore's COVID-19 cases continue to rise, the country's Ministry of Health said it strongly encourages people to wear a face mask even if they're not ill, particularly in crowded places or when visiting vulnerable people. Singapore's Health Ministry said on December 15th that the estimated number of COVID-19 cases increased to 56,043 between December 3rd to 9th, a whopping 75% jump compared with 32,035 cases in the previous week. Well, voters in Democratic Republic of Congo participates in the ongoing general elections on Wednesday after a chaotic campaign by the opposition. The opposition alleges the current government of fraud, violent protest and logistical issues that could keep many voters from participating. Some 44 million Congolese are registered to take part in the presidential, legislative and indigenous vote. As advancing day neared, the authorities sought redundant copters, raising enterprises about the CENI's capability to open polling stations in areas. President Felix Tshisekedi is also contending against around 24 opposition contenders. And now let's take a look at other stories making news around the world. Major automakers, including General Motors, Toyota and Volkswagen, opposed a bid by U.S. auto safety regulators to recall 52 million airbag inflators produced by auto suppliers ARC Automotive and Delphi Automotive. Officials with the U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration backed their claims, saying the airbags may rupture and send metal fragments flying. K-pop star G-Dragon has been cleared of allegations of illegal drug use by South Korean police, according to media reports, after failing to get testimonies in support of the charges. Police had been investigating the singer and rapper, whose given name is Kwon Ji-young, amid an ongoing crackdown on illegal drugs by the government. And still to come on this edition of DD India Live. Digital payments in India record a whopping rise, with UPI being major driving force in growth of digital payments. Tamil Nadu continues to reel under devastating aftermath of floods, even as rescue and relief operations continue. A central assessment team to visit the state on Wednesday.
India that invents. India that innovates. India that excites. India that invites. Land of possibility. Teeming with opportunities. Watch India Ideas each Thursday, 8 p.m. only on DD India.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Live. I'm Lipakshi Khurana, and moving on, let's take a look at the Parliament proceedings lined up for the day. In Lok Sabha, the lower house of the Parliament, Information and Broadcasting Minister Anurag Singh Thakur will move the Press and Registration of Periodics Bill 2023 for consideration and passing. The bill aims to provide for press and registration of periodicals. Also, Law and Justice Minister Arjun Ram Meghwal will move the Chief Election Commissioner and other election commissioners' appointment conditions of service and terms of service office bill 2023 for consideration and passing. Meanwhile, Telecom and Railway Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw will move the Telecommunications Bill 2023 for consideration. In Rajya Sabha, the upper house of Parliament, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman will move the Central Goods and Services Tax Second Amendment Bill 2023 and the Provisional Collection of Taxes Bill 2023. Well, both the houses of the Parliament are witnessing adjournments as opposition parties caused ruckus in the House over security breach at the Parliament. The legislative business in both houses of Parliament has been hampered due to the attitude of the opposition, who are hell-bent at not allowing the proceedings to continue in an orderly manner. Meanwhile, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi called Indian Vice President Jagdeep Dhankhar over the telephone and expressed great pain over the abject theatrics of some MPs, and that too in the sacred Parliament complex on Tuesday. During the conversation, Indian PM told Dhankhar that he himself has been at the receiving end of such insults for over 20 years. The Vice President told the Prime Minister that the antics of a few won't prevent me from performing my duty and upholding the principles enshrined in our Constitution, he said. And India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has for the first time responded to allegations of an Indian assassination plot in the US, saying he will look into any evidence, but a few incidents would not derail US-India ties. In an interview with the Financial Times, India's Prime Minister has played down the diplomatic impact of an US indictment last month that alleged the involvement of an Indian official in a murder attempt on a Sikh separatist in the US. India's Prime Minister further said in the interview that we need to accept the fact that we are living in the era of multilateralism. The world is interconnected as well as interdependent. This reality compels us to recognize that absolute agreement on all matters cannot be a prerequisite for collaboration, unquote, he said. And India's Union Health Minister Dr. Mansukh Mandavia held a high-level review meeting with health ministers and other additional chief of health of all states and union territory today. The meeting focused on the preparedness of health facilities and services given the recent upsurge in respiratory illnesses such as influenza-like illness, severe acute respiratory illness included by COVID-19. The meeting comes after new COVID subvariant JN.1 has now been detected in India. The variant has been caused a spike in cases in US since September this year. Now found in India's Kerala during a routine surveillance, the variant is closely being monitored. And Health Minister of the Southern Indian state of Kerala, Veena George, said that there is no need to worry even though the cases of COVID are increasing in the state. Kerala witnessed an increase in the number of COVID cases in the month of November itself. Accordingly, the Health Department of the Kerala government had taken measures and guidelines were also issued. The State Medical Officers Conference also instructed to take action. And across India, transformative movement is taking roots. The Viksit Bharat Sankalp Yatra, the largest ever outreach initiative of Government of India, is bringing the promise of empowerment and a brighter future to the doorsteps of all Indians. In the series, the Yatra, or the journey, reached the Balian Panchayat or Vedalp in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. The event was held at Sant Ishwar Bharatiya Vidya Mandir School, where locals welcomed the IEC van and listened to the message of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his vision of making India a developed nation by 2047. Government departments set up stalls to advertise various welfare schemes. Resource persons shared information about the government schemes with visitors. The Indian government's flagship program, Viksit Bharat Sankalp Yatra, is being undertaken across the country with an aim to attain saturation of government schemes by ensuring that the benefits of the schemes reach the intended beneficiaries in a time-bound manner. Also, the Viksit Bharat Sankalp Yatra traversed through the Anantapur district of southern Indian state of Andhra Pradesh. As part of the program, short films of the schemes implemented by the central government were shown to the public through the campaign vehicle. Similarly, the officials of the respective departments explained to the people about the central government schemes. Viksit Bharat Sankalp Yatra pledge was also taken during the event. And as the heavy rains continue to lash parts of South Indian state of Tamil Nadu, the state chief minister appealed to the central government for assistance in light of the devastating impact caused by the heavy rainfall. Indian Army and Air Force helicopters conducted relief operations, airdropping over 10 tons of essential supplies. They have successfully evacuated stranded individuals, including women and children, from isolated areas and rooftops. Rescue boats are taking several sorties to take those who are in the floods to be sheltered. Tragically, the floods have claimed the lives of 10 individuals so far. A central assessment team is set to visit state on Wednesday to evaluate the extent of the flood's impact on the affected areas. Well, the Indian economy is growing faster than any major economy and is becoming a top investment destination. Professor Brunello Rosa, CEO of Rosa and Rubini Associates, lauds India's economic moves and hails the IMF report.
The IMF releases Article 4 report for India, a report in which the IMF praised many of the policy decisions that have been made in India by the various actors, the government for adopting sound fiscal policies. This has made India one of the key engines of economic activity at global level, with a contribution of 16% to global growth, which is remarkable for the country.
Well, that's all for this edition of DD India Live. But let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter and Instagram. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Lipakshi Khurana from all of us here in Delhi. Thanks for watching DD India Live.